eyewitness accounts by Polycarp, along with Papias, who were hearers of the Apostle John. Here's what we have. 1. Irenaeus, Papias, Polycarp 2. Irenaeus and Florinus 3. Irenaeus and Victor 4. Irenaeus and the bathhouse 5. Polycarp observed the Sabbath 6. Polycarp and the Philippians 7. Papias and Polycrates 8. Apostolic Eldership Link 9. A Promise, F4 1110. Church Fathers, including Eusebius 11. Polycarp's Letter to the Philippians, Chapter 6. Let us then serve him in fear, and with all reverence, even as he himself has commanded us, and as the apostles who preached the gospel unto us, and the prophets who proclaimed beforehand the coming of the Lord, have alike taught us. Even heretics knew it was Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Justin Martyr cites the Cyrenian census, mentioning Jesus and parents. Jesus, John, Papias, Polycarp, Irenaeus, the 5-volume encyclopedia. Search for Against Heresies, 311. Here it is. Irenaeus writes a 5-volume encyclopedia of rich, 1st and 2nd century Christian history. Irenaeus describes Papias as the hearer of John, and a companion of Polycarp, in Against Heresies 533, 4. Search for Against Heresies 311 to read more. Papias of Hierapolis, the Ancient. We have 10 citations collected from his lost books by Irenaeus. Papias said, "For I did not think that what was to be gotten from the books would profit me as much as what came from the living and abiding voice." Irenaeus affirms that Papias knew John the Apostle, Shanks 288-291. History of the Church 339, 4. Eusebius of Caesarea, 318 AD, Church History 339, 117, quotes Irenaeus. The 5 books of Papias are extant, which bear the title Expositions of Oracles of the Lord. Of these Irenaeus also makes mention as the only works written by him, in the following words: "These things Papias, who was a hearer of John, and a companion of Polycarp, an ancient worthy, witnesseth in writing in the 4th of his books, for there are 5 books composed by him." Papias wrote, "If, then, anyone came, who had been a follower of the elders, I questioned him regarding the words of the elders, what Andrew or what Peter had said, or what was said by Philip or by Thomas or by James or by John, or by Matthew, or by any other of the disciples of the Lord." Notice the past tense. What they had said clearly indicates the apostles were dead, and he wanted to hear from the elders who knew them personally. Now notice the present tense when it comes to hearing the living abiding voice, and what things Ariston and the elder John, the disciples of the Lord, say. Notice the present tense, say. Bart Ehrman suggests, did the tense shift from the aorist deepen? They said, to the present legausen. They are saying, signal that the former 7 disciples had died while Ariston and the elder John were still living. Papias, the hearer of the Apostle John, was a pastor and elder at Hierapolis. He knew the Apostle Philip personally, as Eusebius confirms. 2. 9. That Philip the Apostle resided in Hierapolis with his daughters has been already stated, but how Papias, their contemporary, relates that he had heard a marvelous tale from the daughters of Philip, must be noted here, for he relates that in his time a man rose from the dead, and again he gives another wonderful story about Justus, who was surnamed Barsabas, how that he drank a deadly poison, and yet, by the grace of the Lord, suffered no inconvenience. Book 15, Apostolic Fathers, Lightfoot and Harmer, 1891 translation. Irenaeus of Lyons, disciple of Polycarp. Irenaeus, Bishop of Lyons, provides the origin of the 4 Gospels and their authors. In his Against Heresies, 3:1:1, Irenaeus writes, Matthew also issued a written gospel among the Hebrews in their own dialect, while Peter and Paul were preaching at Rome, and laying the foundations of the church. After their departure, Mark, the disciple and interpreter of Peter, did also hand down to us in writing what had been preached by Peter. Luke also, the companion of Paul, recorded in a book the gospel preached by him. Afterwards John, the disciple of the Lord, who also had leaned upon his breast, did himself publish a gospel during his residence at Ephesus in Asia. There are 4 gospels, and only 4, neither more nor less. Christ is at the center of them. John actually speaks of his kingly and glorious sonship to the Father in his opening words, "In the beginning was the Word," 3:11. Irenaeus and Eusebius point out, He 5:8, 4, stating that John, the disciple of the Lord, who rested on Jesus' breast, hokai epi to stithis autau anapasorn, produced his gospel while living in Ephesus, HE 5:8, 4, ADV, Higher 3:3-4, Irenaeus, Eusebius points out, HE 5:8, 4, states the disciple whom Jesus loved. Irenaeus was about 27 years old and a pupil of Polycarp. Polycarp learned from John himself when he was in his youth. We can place Irenaeus in the bathhouse and in Polycarp's home learning from him. Bart Ehrman says, expressly ADV, Hviers 3:3, et apud Euseb, hist. Eccles 4:14, he was instructed, perhaps converted,
Μαθητευτής.
by the apostles and conversed familiarly with many who had seen Christ, was by the apostles appointed,
Κατασταθής.
bishop of the church at Smyrna, and always taught what he had learned from the apostles. Irenaeus writes, I can even describe the place where the blessed Polycarp used to sit and discourse, his going out, too, and his coming in, his general mode of life and personal appearance, together with the discourses which he delivered to the people, also how he would speak of his familiar intercourse with John, and with the rest of those who had seen the Lord, and how he would call their words to remembrance. Fragments from the Lost Writings of Irenaeus, Chapter 2. Bart Ehrman supports my view. To the Traditional View, Part 2. Florinus of Rome. Irenaeus also references Polycarp in his letter to Florinus, establishing Irenaeus's presence in Polycarp's house, those presbyters who preceded us and who were conversant with the apostles, did not hand down to thee. For, while I was yet a boy, I saw thee in Lower Asia with Polycarp, distinguishing thyself in the royal court and endeavoring to gain his approbation, so that I can even describe the place where the blessed Polycarp used to sit and discourse, his going out, too, and his coming in, his general mode of life and personal appearance, together with the discourses which he delivered to the people, also how he would speak of his familiar intercourse with John and with the rest of those who had seen the Lord, and how he would call their words to remembrance, whatsoever things he had heard from them respecting the Lord, both with regard to his miracles and his teaching. Polycarp, having thus received from the eyewitnesses of the word of life, would recount them all in harmony with the Scriptures. These things, through God's mercy which was upon me, I then listened to attentively, and treasured them up not on paper but in my heart, and I am continually, by God's grace, revolving these things accurately in my mind. Victor of Rome. Irenaeus also mentions Polycarp in his letter to Bishop Victor. 1. Bart Ehrman notes the existence of a tradition that is eyewitness to John the Apostle. Ehrman states, already in the writings of the Church Father Papias, now lost, but partially preserved by Eusebius in Historia Ecclesiastica 3:39, 1:417, around 120-30 CE, nearly half a century before Irenaeus, Papias claimed, on the basis of good authority, that the disciple Matthew had written down the sayings of Jesus in the Hebrew language, and the others had provided translations of them, presumably into Greek. He also said that Peter's companion Mark had rearranged the preaching of Peter about Jesus and created a book out of it. 2. Irenaeus, living with Polycarp, learned and was discipled by him, his going in and out. 4. While I was yet a boy, I saw thee in Lower Asia with Polycarp, distinguishing thyself in the royal court and endeavoring to gain his approbation, so that I can even describe the place where the blessed Polycarp used to sit and discourse, his going out, too, and his coming in, his general mode of life and personal appearance, together with the discourses which he delivered to the people, also how he would speak of his familiar intercourse with John and with the rest of those who had seen the Lord, and how he would call their words to remembrance. Irenaeus, placed in the bathhouse and Polycarp's home, learned from him. Bart Ehrman notes, expressly ADV, Hviers 3:3, et apud Euseb, hist. Eccles 4:14, he was instructed, perhaps converted,
Μαθητευτής.
by the apostles and conversed familiarly with many who had seen Christ, was by the apostles appointed,
Κατασταθής.
bishop of the church at Smyrna, and always taught what he had learned from the apostles. Irenaeus wrote, but Polycarp also was not only instructed by apostles and conversed with many who had seen Christ, but was also, by apostles in Asia, appointed bishop of the church in Smyrna, whom I also saw in my early youth, for he tarried on earth a very long time, and, when a very old man, gloriously, and most nobly suffering martyrdom, departed this life, having always taught the things which he had learned from the apostles, and which the church has handed down, and which alone are true. To these things all the Asiatic churches testify, as do also those men who have succeeded Polycarp down to the present time, against heresies 3:1:1. And again, Irenaeus wrote, then, after the publication of the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, John, the disciple of the Lord, who had even rested on his breast, himself also gave forth the gospel, while he was living at Ephesus in Asia. Cited in Eusebius, Church History 5:8, compare Irenaeus, against heresies 3:1:1. 2. Irenaeus, even as the gospel and all the elders testify, those who were conversant in Asia with John, the disciple of the Lord, affirming that John conveyed to them that information, and he remained among them up to the times of Trajan. Some of them, moreover, saw not only John, but the other apostles also, and heard the very same account from them, and bear testimony as to the validity of the statement. Whom then should we rather believe? ADB. Higher 2:5.